it was incumbent on me to let people around me who were different to me know who I was and teach them how to be with me, how to relate to me, and how to get to know me. One of the funny anecdotes that I tell sometimes is I lived in a very inner city suburb in Perth. It's an affluent area, and it's got all these boutiques and jewelry shops and nice things. And I would walk into a boutique and there'd be this hello, sort of hello. And then there'd be this almost all of the attendants in the shop would be sort of gravitating because they'd actually not been in a proximity to a black person before. They were white women typically. And they would say hello and they'd be touching. So they wanted to touch my hair because my hair was different. I used to braid my hair. I used to do different things to my hair. We know the hair story as black women,
We
but
do.
they've never, and also skin, because our skin is very different. It looks different, it feels different, it catches the light differently. And there was this like eternal fascination. And I was actually, I would say tolerant. I wouldn't say open to, but I was tolerant and patient with all of that because I thought, I live in this area. They're
Yeah.
seeing me for the first time. It's the first sort of year, 2 years, whatever that I'm here.
Mm.
And there's a learning of each other that's happening. But I got to a point where I thought, I've now done all of that in terms of service of being this person who's like a showpiece. And I needed to start, sort of establishing a sense of boundary. We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
It's conversations like the one I have just finished having right now with Pearl that remind me how talented, how highly qualified women of color are. Now, Pearl is a good friend, somebody I've known for many, many years. It was hard to pin down how we met, when we met, and how long we've known each other. We're thinking it's roughly between 10 and 15 years. And she is a delight, a joy, the kind of person that you get in touch with and they're like, sure, what do you need me to do? Where, when, what time? She's a kind of a soul. And so when we sat down to have this conversation, she poured out, she gave and gave and gave. And for that, I am not only grateful, but I know what this conversation is going to do for you as the listener. You're going to get so much that you probably need to come back again and listen. This is a conversation that will benefit you, whether you are a person of color who needs to hear about navigating life, particularly in spaces where you haven't seen yourself represented, really talking about mental health and the traumas that we carry in our bodies. And then for you as a white person who's listening, perhaps you are somebody who's trauma informed. This conversation, Pearl shares specific tips on how to support people who you perhaps don't come from the same background, but you are somebody who is a therapist, you're trauma informed. How do you hold space for that? She shares some really key tips. And so, without further ado, let me read to you who Pearl is because she is an incredible human being. Pearl Proud is an executive consultant, psychologist, advisor, board chair, patron, traditional healer, and founder with a deep commitment to supporting flourishing communities and fostering connection and healing. She has worked across sectors including health, government, arts, governance, and community sector, always with a mission to inspire through leadership, mentorship, services, and strategic insight. Pearl has co is the co-founder of the Mother and Son Project as a way of honoring and celebrating the relationship between mothers and sons. This bio does not do Pearl justice. She is so much more than just what I have read. But without further ado, here is my beautiful friend, Pearl Brown. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. Pearl Proud. I am so happy to have you on here. And in all honesty, we've been talking for the last half hour, to be quite honest. We've been catching up. We haven't caught up for a very, very long time, and we've known each other for so long. We forget how we met, Pearl. I don't know if you remember how we met, but it's
Mm.
been forever.
Yes, that is true.
Um, I haven't told you this in the half hour that we were talking, but you look so beautiful. You look so gorgeous. Your
Oh,
top is matching with like the
the
photograph that you have
paintings.
at the back.
Yeah,
I don't
the
know if that's a
paintings.
thing that you did or it's just for me, special for me. You look amazing. You look so gorgeous.
Thank you. You're being very kind because you always look stunning. So coming from you, this is a compliment.
No, you have absolutely dressed for this very, very important conversation. You're one of those people who I have always thought of, Pearl, so accomplished, so grounded, somebody who just and so kind, so generous with your time. I cannot remember the last time we connected. Honestly, it's probably been, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
7 years, 7 years, 8 years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's been
Yeah.
literally when you came on, we just started talking. We started talking like we were on a conversation like a few days ago. And I love that. I
Mm.
really, really love that. And that says a lot about the person that you are. So thank you.
Thank you for having me here. I'm very proud. I know I'm a Pearl proud, but I'm very proud to be here and really honored to be here and wanted to congratulate you on the podcast. You're doing a great job.
Appreciate that. Pearl, let's take this journey back. I know you've been in Australia for a long time, almost 40 years. When I was doing my research, I was like, hang on, this cannot be true. And then we have a conversation, and you're like, 38 years ago. And I'm like, oh my God, it is true. You've been here for almost 40 years. So, born in Durban, South Africa, and you've called Australia home for almost 40 years. Talk
Yes.
us through how that journey has been. I mean, we're talking about back in 1987,
Mm.
Pearl,
Mm.
and to the many things that you have accomplished to getting to where you are now. Are there some things that you can tell us just briefly about how you've arrived to where you're at?
Right. This is a very big question,
I know
but
it
also
is.
it says something about how the fact that I'm an old woman. That's true too, because we can have a look back, and you can only do that through a fair chunk of time.
Yeah.
So it's just reminding everybody that I'm an elder, I'm middle age, and I've done a couple of things. I was born in Durban. So Durban is in South Africa on the coast. So Cape Town is at the bottom, and then you go up along the coast and Durban, and then you go all the way through to get to even Mozambique along that coast. I was a last born in my family. And and I know as African women that we've got extended families that are really, really blended. And I had the privilege of growing up with sisters, with brothers, with cousins who are like sisters. We don't do cousin. And so it was an interesting time to be born in South Africa because we were living under apartheid. So there was a lot of inequality, there was a lot of discrimination, and a lot of activism. So I was in the student movement as a young girl because you had to confront injustice. I've always been that way inclined. And so we were very active because we needed to change our country, but we also needed to change the world. As young people, we're always very ambitious, we want to change the world. And of course, as everybody know, in our collective history, that South Africa did come to a point where we had a change in the dispensation in South Africa, and we now have a democratic government, and we have a democratic system with the new constitution. So the country has gone through this transformation. And as a young person, I was also, like a lot of Black South Africans, very idealistic about what we wanted to see our country be, and also wanted to see the world um, be a place of equity, peace, and prosperity for everyone.
Yeah.
And so I went through school. I went through high school, went through college, but I was headhunted to be one of the first Black cohort of bankers in the country. And I went for an interview as a very young girl, and in this, tall, building, a tower in the middle of the city in Durban, and ended up going and being selected to go into this program to basically prepare us to go into banking, and started with Barclays Bank. And I was there for a bit, and then I met my then, partner, and got married and moved to Australia.
Yes.
I didn't know anything much about Australia when we met. And I remember thinking, is it Austria? No, it's not Austria. It's
Mhm.
Australia. It's the Australia one. And I had to try and separate the two things. So I arrived in Australia in 1987. And you and I know Perth as a racial landscape because you've lived
Mm.
in Perth. When I first arrived here, there was one African family from South Africa. There was one other lady who was African from South Africa, and literally there were some South Africans who were of mixed race.
Yeah.
Literally no Africans in Perth, no South Africans in Perth. And I just remember thinking, this is a very interesting space. I had worked at the bank, and we were a mixed uh, group of people as bankers in my branch and across Barclays Bank. But of course, I was, one of the very few Black bankers. But I was used to working with people of other races. I had some friends who were, white. I had some friends who were Indian descent. I had friends who were mixed race. So coming to Australia, even though the country and the landscape was very white, the culture was very white, we obviously have always had Indigenous Australians. So
Yeah.
I had a sense of sisterhood and connection to Aboriginal Australians when I first arrived here. We lived in a small country town first, and ran an Aboriginal medical service. And I got to be, welcomed and sort of into the fold by Indigenous brothers and sisters. And then we moved to another town in regional, Western Australia, and we ran a medical practice there. Similarly, a lot of people from other parts of the country, a lot of people from other parts of the world, but also Indigenous Australians lived in the town. So even though it was such a different landscape culturally, there was a level of affinity there in terms of being a Black person and having Black people in this country that
Yeah.
I could connect with, but also obviously had people from every part of the world. Australia is the second most multicultural country on the planet. So the privilege of actually connecting with people from everywhere, literally everywhere in this country, has been remarkable to me.
Wow. What a story. And just, I don't think I have spoken to anyone who has lived in Australia that long, to the point where you're saying when you arrived, it was like one African family that you can think of. And then that was it. And just your openness, the way you were so open to being here, the people you worked with, what you were exposed to, and that connection to our First Nations people, that connection that you felt it probably deeper than you would have had you been surrounded by, many more Africans. Um, and Black Africans to be specific, because obviously we have, those who are white Africans as well. I remember I arrived in Australia in 2000, and there was little representation of Black people, at least to me, not knowing your story. How was it for you navigating life as a Black woman in the 1990s? And I love what you say. You gave an interview, I believe it was to SBS, and one of the things that you said, and I quote, was, I overcome challenges with a never-ending sense of optimism, gratitude, a keen sense of service, and paying forward the privilege of being raised with love. Oh, that just hit me. I love it so much.
It is,
So,
and it's so true. It is so true. My mother was one of the most loving human beings. And, I'm a psychologist, as you know, and we know the impact of not having had that close attachment with a parental figure, but particularly a mother. Coming from a place of love, being raised by somebody who has love to give is one of the most anchoring starts in life that serves you all of your life. I'm always very aware of the privilege and also the gift that my mother gave me. And I sometimes say this, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's also really, really true. My mother was my soulmate. And she was also a person who would die for me. So being raised by someone who would lay her life down for you is the most amazingly affirming thing in the world. It gave me a basis for me to have a sense of identity that is unshakable, but also to know that I'm loved and I'm lovable. I've never had to worry or doubt that. So people who've come into my life at different times have a really high bar, a very high bar, because I know what love feels like and I know what love I can give and how it lands and what a loving relationship and a connection looks like. I try and do that with everybody that I come across and also in friendship, because I think friendships need to be anchored in love, which is expressed, and also with clients. Clients need to have a safe space that has a lot of love and hope in it to be able to explore their challenges and to explore traumas. So that is very, very true for me, that that sense of gratitude and a really keen awareness of the privilege I have and that I was gifted is always there. Navigating being a Black woman in Australia and someone of African descent was a really interesting start to my life here. It was very helpful, by the way, that I had the most loving in-laws to arrive to. My father-in-law at the time sent me a 5-page letter before I arrived here, to let me know that I had a family waiting, that I was a gift to them, that they knew that they were being blessed with, and that I needed not have any apprehension because I had a family here that's waiting for me. And it was so very true. As soon as I arrived, I felt really welcome and really treasured by my in-laws, very treasured by my immediate family here, and a real sense of belonging. So that was a real, again, a very anchoring situation to be in, because I didn't have to wonder whether, um, I was loved and wanted in my, in my in-law family. In a broader sense, though, there was obviously a lot of needing to adjust to something that was very new in terms of the country, the countryside, the landscape, the cultural landscape, social landscape, etc. But I've always been a very adaptable person. And there's an African saying that we are never given anything that we cannot deal with, and however big challenge is. We were made to meet it. We have everything we need to meet it. And I think that was somewhat true for me. I was never daunted by the newness of things. I'm highly adaptable. But I also was aware that there was going to be a very, possibly a very long time where I needed to educate and to teach. It was incumbent on me to let people around me who were different to me know who I was and teach them how to be with me, how to relate to me, and how to get to know me. One of the funny anecdotes that I tell sometimes is I lived in a very inner city suburb in Perth. It's an affluent area, and it's got all these boutiques and jewelry shops and nice things. And I would walk into a boutique and there'd be this hello, sort of hello. And then there'd be this almost all of the attendants in the shop would be sort of gravitating because they'd actually not been in a proximity to a black person before. They were white women typically. And they would say hello and they'd be touching. So they wanted to touch my hair because my hair was different. I used to braid my hair, I used to do different things to my hair. We know the hair story as black women,
We
but
do.
they've never, and also skin, because our skin is very different. It looks different, it feels different, it catches the light differently. And there was this like eternal fascination. And I was actually, I would say tolerant. I wouldn't say open to, but I was tolerant and patient with all of that because I thought, I live in this area. They're
Yeah.
seeing me for the first time. It's the first sort of year, 2 years, whatever that I'm here.
Mhm.
And there's a learning of each other that's happening. But I got to a point where I thought, I've now done all of that in terms of service, of being this person who's like a showpiece. And I needed to start, sort of establishing a sense of boundary so that because as you would know as an African we don't actually get touched on our head as people. No, no. Maybe when you're a child as an adult, because they're taller, they might sort of pet you. But Africans don't pat on the head. We don't do that. It's a really disrespectful thing to do.
Yeah.
And, as the years went by, I became a traditional healer. And we didn't, definitely do not touch traditional healers at home, as you know, on the
Yeah.
continent. And we certainly do not touch them on the head. Even though I had not been initiated at that time, I think I already at a deeper level and maybe at an intuitive level knew that I needed to have a sense of boundary
Mhm.
and assert the sense of boundary very politely, but do that. So I had to then shift from being patient and tolerant around being touched and educate people that actually they couldn't just lean in and touch me. It's almost like when you are pregnant and
Yes.
people just come and touch your stomach because you're this lady who's pregnant. It's like actually I'm a human being, I'm a woman, and I have a life that I'm growing, and I still have a sense of distance that I need to have around and a sense of personal space that I need to have. You can't just go touching, people that you do not know and give yourself the license to do that. So that was a really interesting, shift from very, very early days to when I thought, I think I've done my educating piece. I live in the suburb and I need to actually have a sense of boundary here, even though people were being nice. And I thought being nice is not going to be a passport anymore to come and sort of invade my space or my personal space. So that was very interesting. But yes, it's been a gradual evolution over the decades of Perth
Mhm.
and the state of Western Australia changing with more and more people coming from different parts of the world, Black people, people of color coming from different parts of the world to live here. And it's also been a gradual change for Australia as a country
Yeah.
in terms of the waves of migration that have arrived in the country. Yes.
Oh my goodness, Pearl. We could just unpack that whole story of the boutique and the different, like, we could just sit on that and talk about it. But it's just how you have taken us on that journey and just described what it feels like to be on the other side, to be tolerant, but also get to a point where I have to have my boundaries now because I'm not a showpiece. Love that word that you use. I am not a showpiece because often that is how we are viewed. We are viewed as this commodity, this vessel that can just be, probed or looked at or viewed and examined. But we are not that. We're human. We are
Mhm.
women. We have life in us. And I love how that kind of evolved and you began to have those boundaries. I'm curious to know what made you get into psychology? Was it something that attracted you into it? Because then your world has really been in the world of mental health. And when we met, you were working for Headspace at the time. So what led you into psychology?
Hmm. I think I've always been a person that was going to be of service. So when we're in grade 5, which is very typical in high schools, especially in Africa, the teacher goes around and says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?"
Yeah.
It's a beautifully open question. It also helps children be aspirant. It helps children dream and
Mm,
imagine the future, but also, in a way, possibly unconsciously set goals. So I've always loved that question because it inspires so much. But also, it tells people around you how you view yourself and your place in the world, right? So we all would take turns and talk about who we wanted to be and what we wanted to be when we were grown. And I remember the row, there were 2 rows to my right, and the teacher started there, and the kids were all saying different things. And they were very categoric. They would say things like, "I want to be a teacher, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse," and they would say very specific things. And as you know, the line was approaching me, I thought, I've actually never thought about anything specific. And I thought, should I come up with something? And I thought, no, because I can't come, really, really, I couldn't land on anything specific. And I remember when it came to me, I looked up and I said, I want to help people. That's all I said. That's all I could say.
yeah.
And then the teacher said, "Oh, fantastic," and moved on. And looking back now, I thought, what an amazing teacher to not pause and shame me or want me to become specific or be like the other kids.
Yes.
And sometimes it's what people do not do that makes you realize what they're doing. Because I've been in enough situations now where I'm running workshops or we're having, conversations or I mean in a forum or whatever, that some facilitators really hone in on someone who says something a little bit different or someone who varies something. And then that person has to explain themselves, right? So, and I thought my teacher didn't actually ask me to do that. She didn't ask me to pedal harder and to make sense of something. She just accepted what I said. But anyway, so you were talking about choosing the profession of psychology. I think it's because it's set within that mm, aspiration and that sense of being of service, having always been of service. I used to do a lot of jobs as a young kid. I learned to cook at 8, and I used to help, around the kitchen. I used to help, manage the household. We had, help. People used to, clean the house and all that. But I learned all the jobs because I was always a kid who was going to be, being of service. And I used to make tea in a very methodical, very careful way for the adults. And if anyone wanted a really good cup of tea, they would ask me to do it because I had this, sort of care around all of that, and I wanted everything to just right. I would warm the milk, warm the cups, do the whole thing. So when I think back now, and I remember that I actually started a working career in banking, there was a part of it that was really good because this was an honor to be, amongst first Black people to go into banking. I didn't have to look for the job. I sort of landed in that space, and I think perhaps spirit just landed me in that space so
Yes.
that it would start my working career. And then when it came to a time in Australia where I thought, what do I want to study now? That's when I chose psychology. I also chose literature. I chose a degree in English. I did 2 degrees. because I thought I've always, well, I thought I might be an academic and I might be a psychologist. So I read Shakespeare in high school. I used to read a lot as a kid. I can't even tell you how many novels I read. I can't even tell you how I used to be lost in the Mills and Boone romantic novels as a young girl, and I would be
Yeah.
in my room just like hours of reading. So I've always gone into the literary aspects of things, very, very analytical brain, and just love literature. I love fiction. I love reading, and I like stories in terms of hearing the voice of someone telling me something, imparting something.
Mm.
So then I went into university to do psychology and do English and do literature. And I chose consciously to do psychology because it was a departure from banking. And I know it was going to be a pathway for me to actually help people and to work with people. And it was a very conscious choice.
Wow. And it's led you into a space that now, back then it probably wasn't as big a deal or as big a conversation as we are currently right now when it comes to mental health.
Mm.
And specifically, the support that you give to children and adults who come from multicultural backgrounds. Is there a recurring theme that you see coming up through supporting them as a psychologist?
hmm I've been a psychologist for over 30 years. I have worked in all different sectors.
Yeah.
I have worked with all different populations, all different, racial backgrounds, all different ages. I think my oldest client in my career was 84.
Wow.
And he came to see me because his family were concerned about his mental state, and they thought that having lost his wife, he had actually gone into a depression, and they were right. He was grieving, but also he agreed to come and see somebody because he wanted to say a few things before he passed. So from very, very young kids to all the way to older adults.
Mhm.
Um, there are commonalities about human beings and mental health. Obviously, we're all human, and we have disorders that do not, select according to background or select according to racial background. And sometimes they might be more concentrated in terms of their expression or their onset around certain ages in our lifespan, but they also can present typically at any time. So the most prevalent presentation or mental health challenge is anxiety, and it can come on at any age, and it can be an issue for someone at any age. And it is across the world, across all different populations, across all humans. Yeah, depression is another one like that. It can affect all different people at different times for different reasons. But having worked with young people, and ran a service, and having run a service, I should say, focused on young people. And we had a service, headspace from 12 to 25-year-olds, which when you think about the ages, it's actually young people and adults in one cohort of client. But
Mhm.
the service ran from 12 to 25. So we had to manage a whole range of disorders and presentations and challenges, and also life events that can happen at different stages in that time frame. And all of that really was indicative of the fact that there are certain issues that arise and particularly beset younger people. And in a way, really, when you're a psychologist, two of the primary things we try to do as a profession is to alleviate distress
Mhm.
and to save lives. And you are dealing with preventing distress if you can, and preventing suicide if you can, or responding to the risk
Mhm.
of those two aspects. So we are very scientific in psychology. Obviously, it's very evidence-based. It's a lot of research that's taken, decades and decades to put together and continues. So we tend to be able to assess and diagnose and then treat people. And with time, you start to notice that there are certain differences that present. And you were asking me specifically about people from culturally diverse backgrounds in terms of what challenges, what issues tend to be ones that are concentrated around this population, which you and I are part of. So I had the privilege of setting up the first of its kind service, which was specifically funded to look after the mental health of culturally diverse peoples here. And we, you know, were lucky enough after a long time of people like me advocating for the fact that we needed a specific service for culturally diverse people because of the presentations that were, specific and sometimes unique, that I was able to set a service like this from scratch. What used to be a pride was that I set the service up uh, inside an organization in Perth, being a person of color, but also it was for people of color, and it was going to be staffed by people of color, and it was unknown, which I was very very proud and privileged to be part of setting something like that, and working hard to make sure that we had the highest standards to have a service looking after people of culturally diverse backgrounds. You were asking me about what sets this particular group of people apart and what I have observed over the years. We are people who have arrived in Australia, all of us except Indigenous Australians. And then we have all arrived from different parts of the world.
Yeah.
We know that people of color have a colonialist past, and we have come from countries and cultures which have had a lot of adverse events and sometimes wars. But underpinning all of that is a whole lot of trauma for people who end up arriving in Australia, especially people of refugee background. We have immigrants who choose to come to Australia. We have people who are professionals who sometimes choose to come to Australia. But because of our backgrounds as people of color, we come from countries where a lot of things have happened which have been traumatic for people. That is also the case, obviously, for people who come from other war-torn areas, like, let's say Sarajevo as a city, in different parts of the world. But for people of color, this tends to be a common thread and a common theme that people have had at times quite severe traumas that they're arriving into Australia with. I similarly had the privilege of running a clinical service for refugees, newly arrived Australians, and asylum seekers, which was a trauma specialist service. I specialize in trauma. And it made you realize what the dynamics of trauma can be, and how deep and how generational trauma can be. So, one of the things that I always have found interesting and have observed is that when people typically first arrive in Australia, they are either fleeing a situation or they are on a visa, having waited a very long time to arrive here. Maybe they've lived in a camp somewhere, they've been in a UNHCR service and space waiting to come to Australia. And we tend to be very preoccupied with supporting people to settle here. So very practical needs first. And people's traumas tend to just sort of wait their turn. And then once people feel settled, they feel safer and they feel more almost like they've taken a deeper breath to be here, and they've oriented themselves into living here, then trauma hits. And there's a delay. There's typically a delay. And this can be some months, it can be years when before someone starts to have real problems, because trauma finally has a chance to actually express itself and present itself to be dealt with. So, in terms of what then tends to set people of color apart, trauma is major, really, really major, and you need to be very good at working with trauma to be able to help people of color when they're presenting. You need to always include that aspect in your assessments, because it affects almost everything, and it can affect the next generation and then the generation after that. The other aspect is that People of color don't tend to come from cultures where mental health is recognized or discussed,
Yes.
let alone treated. So there's a whole piece around helping people feel comfortable talking about their mental health,
Mhm.
people feeling like it's not something to hide and not hiding their distress when they're feeling distressed. So over the decades, I've done a lot of work doing psychoeducation for people or people of color around mental health to take away the stigma, to normalize the fact that it's actually part of your body, it's part of you in terms of you being a whole person, and it's not something to be set aside or something to be ignored. And helping people be confident to start conversations around mental health, but also to get habituated into having conversations inside families with their parents, with their children, with their siblings, and sometimes having conversations with people outside of Australia because we are part of the diaspora here and our extended families typically are somewhere else. So you might then, as your psychoeducation starts to improve, note that there's someone back home or there are people back home who are struggling and maybe they have always struggled with something that you've now realized is a mental health challenge, and being able to then have conversations to facilitate that for people who are far away is also a way of empowering people to normalize talking about mental health. And then the final thing as well about people of color and this mental health journey and what can be unique to them is access. So typically, people arrive with very little. They are on Medicare, but which means that they have access to mental health services, but and also just general health services. But a lot of the time, they're living in areas which are outer suburb areas that might not have the inner city ease to get to a service. You might need to take two buses to get to a specialist medical appointment or go to a hospital to be presenting there to get support. So the whole thing to do with socioeconomic factors as well as access. So one of the things I've done, and a fair number of other people try and do this in a similar way, is to improve access for people of color to services, to let people of color know where the services are, what the services are, what they do, and what they can expect from them, including just a relationship with your GP. What do GPs do? What can you expect from your GP?
Mhm.
How can you have conversations that are meaningful, that are also supportive of your GP to look after you? And what are you entitled to when you see a GP? Because we come from cultures where people don't have a sense of entitlement.
That's right.
So even things that are supposed to be available for all of us, which are free, which are basic rights in Australia, but also are entitlements within our medical system, people do not realize that they can actually ask for things they need, that they need to be served by professionals who are working with them, that it's their entitlement to actually expect certain services in a timely manner. So giving people a confidence to actually have conversations with their GPs, for example, and request things that they need, and to ask for referrals that they need, but also to change their GP if the GP is not a good fit for you. People sometimes don't even know that you can actually change your GP. And they sometimes people think that because you've seen a GP at that particular clinic, then that's it, you need to be staying there. And that GP might not be doing well for you or might not understand who you are and what you need. But sometimes people have not thought or known that they can actually go to a different GP or change their GP.
Speaking of educating, people of color about what their rights are, what their entitlements are, what about on the other side of the conversation, uh, professionals who perhaps are not people of color, but they're supporting people of color? And what advice do you have for them? Because they don't necessarily are in a position to understand the cultural background of, Black people specifically who are coming in, may not have that understanding. How do they navigate that relationship, that patient, practitioner relationship?
Mm. It is very true that our profession as psychologists doesn't have enough diversity in it.
Mm.
I sit on a consultative committee at one of the universities that trains psychologists here. I've been working very hard over some decades now, building the skill set for psychologists of color, encouraging people to take up the profession, and making sure that we've got really, really good quality care, but also that our practitioners who are people of color are well skilled. It's
Yeah.
an investment that I make because I think it's very important for everybody to have a skilled person work with them. People can be very nice, but if they're not skilled, you're not going to improve that much. It is a very interesting space, this one of working cross-culturally. So the reality of it is that we have more psychologists who are not of color in Australia than
Yeah.
those who are. And therefore, the chances of someone who's of color seeing a person of color as a psychologist is less than
Mhm.
seeing someone who is not a person of color. We train psychologists, because I supervise psychologists, I train psychologists. We train psychologists to be culturally informed, to be evidence based, to be trauma informed. So, what does that mean? I also, deliver lectures to university students who are psychology students and do lectures on working interculturally and intercultural psychology as a space. We need to be able to give confidence to all people to be able to work with all people.
Yeah.
But we need to skill people to do that. It's not something that you learn in a book sometimes. And if you are lucky, you're going to have someone who can supervise you, maybe to grow your expertise in that area. But fundamental, we need to have the motivation to do so. And we need to have the confidence to do so. So, starting at university is a really good grounding for people to know that they can move in a confident way, build their skills and their knowledge to work in a way that's going in a space that's going to be multicultural, because Australia is a multicultural space. There are there's an ideal we can have. And if you're lucky, you're gonna get this. You're a diverse person, you're working with a diverse psychologist. If you're a client who is of diverse background, you might need to inquire whether the person who's gonna see you who's not of color is culturally attuned, culturally skilled, or and trauma informed, because that's going to help you feel more confident about that relationship. It doesn't mean that we dismiss the value or the benefits we can gain from someone who doesn't look like us, but we might need to just inquire a little bit more about who they are and what they're going to bring into the therapeutic space with you. On the other side, it is incumbent on the professions, whether medical, whether psychological, that practitioners know and note that they're working in a multicultural space, and Australia is a multicultural country, and have it as part of their training and their learning to be able to work across cultures. There are some very good courses you can take as an additional skilling aspect when you've already done your degree and graduated, etc. I think it can be an area of focus and interest for some psychologists to think, I'm actually in a multicultural climate. I'm going to come across clients who don't look like me, who don't sound like me. How am I going to be able to best serve them? And then they self-skill. But there's also a need for courses to have this aspect and have more of this aspect and component in our training.
Mm.
But I've noticed that sometimes the reverse is also possible. That if you're a psychologist of color, you need to reassure the clients who don't look like you, who do not sound like you, that you're going to be able to support them, that you have skills and you have an attunement, and are going to be able to support them through their journey. They might also think, because you're a Black person and they're white, you might not be able to understand things about what's going on for them, that there's a barrier there, which is a racial barrier. It's all perception. Sometimes it's real, but it can be there. So we also need to lean into a therapeutic relationship being cognizant of any of the barriers that might present, including this particular one, and cover all of that with the client at that first consultation and first session that we want to have with them, so that we are covering anything that's going to interfere with the therapeutic relationship, including our differences. So I'm the therapist, we are the client, we are both human. But what are the things here that might actually present barriers for us that might mean that we don't get each other sometimes? And you cover all of those, including these sort of differences.
Oh, that is such sound advice. I don't think I've heard that before. I've been in spaces where, as a racial equity coach, supporting online business owners, some of them are therapists, and there's always that hesitation of, I don't know what I would do if I had a client, a patient of color come to my practice. How would I be able to fully support them? And that, what you've just shared there is so, so important for somebody to understand and to lean in. So I appreciate that advice. And I know recently you shared about you have started, or it's been a while. It's been probably over a year. You started your own consulting firm, and you wear many hats. You wear many, many hats in terms of governance. You're a psychologist. You're an executive consultant. There are many, many hats that you wear. And so tell us a little bit about Pearl Proud Consulting Group, what you're doing there, what projects you're working on, so that people can have a deeper appreciation of the kind of gem that you are, because you are truly living that ethos from year 5 of helping people.
Mm, mm. I think we never leave things that we know when we are young, do we? And there's a beautiful thing that at times is warranted is that we sort of go back in time to review what we might have said when we were children, or some of the things that we stated when we were children.
Yes.
Because I think we sort of go back to source, and we go back to ourselves, and honor ourselves, really.
Yeah.
Yes. So the consultancy space is a broad one because of the different things that one can expect in that space.
Mm,
And as you have mentioned, there's the governance component of the work, where there's coaching for young directors and also to support people who are professional who want to go into governance, providing that coaching and support in terms of resources, in terms of skilling, the options that people have in terms of their training, etc., etc., and also providing consulting services for strategic planning, for advice and building of the cohesion for boards, because you can have a lot of fracture on boards. You can sometimes be lost in boards in terms of where you are at in with your maturity cycle as a board, and what type of dynamics can be at each stage of the cycle for boards, but also just aspects like incorporating diversity into your board and making sure that that is going to be the most effective mix you're going to have in terms of skills. But also, if you're a chair, how to work well with diversity on your boards and on your board and facilitating that. So that's all of the offering that sits in that governance space. But of course, also I then offer services to be on boards and to chair boards and committees and etc. And that's a good way of practicing as well as guiding and supporting. The other space is the inclusivity space, which you are also part of on the East Coast. And I've been in that space for maybe 7, 8 years now, and I'm a consultant in inclusivity for any organization that wants to work in the space, enhance what they do in the space, but also have the practical means and the how to navigate that space to ensure that they have an inclusive workplace and an inclusive culture. Because it's not the fact that we want to have these things, it's actually working towards having these things. We need to know how to get to these spaces that we might set goals as an
mm,
organization to get to, but we want to have people who can support us in skilling to get there. So that's part of the inclusivity space for me in terms of the consultancy and for people that I partner with to do that work. So one of the things that I shifted, having worked, in different organizations, worked as a consultant, was to actually partner and collaborate with other people so that when I'm not able to do something, there's going to be someone who's going to be able to do something because working as a solo trader is not as impactful as it can be. Sometimes you are doing one thing, but it also means while you're doing the one thing, you can't do something else. So it's been a really lovely space to go into in terms of selecting people to partner with, people to collaborate with, and people to work in the space and contribute in the space. People who are like-minded, so that we can be a real strong unit to deliver the work. I'm also part of Symetra.
Yes.
Yes, in terms of again, still this inclusive space. So Symetra has been around for some decades, and it's a global firm. And I'm a principal consultant with them because they speak my language in terms of inclusivity. But also they have the scaffolding that's there for someone like me to work with them in the best way possible to deliver very specific content, deliver very well cultivated and well structured workshops and coaching for executives and boards. And again, it's part of being in a larger team, which is really, really good because you are collaborating to get the impact. The clinical side of things, as part of the consultancy, means that we can offer clinical supervision to psychologists and other allied health. I've been talking to you a bit about mental health.
Yes.
All of that sits in that supervision space, but also you can grow skills that way because I've been in this profession for a long time. The other people have been in the profession for a long time. We are good at providing guidance and supervision, but also to support people in their skilling to actually be better therapists and to be better clinical support and clinical service providers. It's a, for psychologists to become psychologists, it's a very long journey.
It is.
Besides the training at university, you have to do, your registration supervision, then you have to do your supervision as part of practicing. And then there are some fundamentals which are really good to be supported in doing, like our reflection. So we have obviously part of clinical supervision, we have a reflection component, which means that you have a chance to debrief with the person who has more experience than you and to explore some cases with someone, but also to reflect on your journey as a therapist and as a professional in supporting other people because it needs to be sustainable, it needs to be effective, and we need some opportunities to be able to review what we do and how we do it.
Mm.
And there are times when I offer time and capability to help services set up. So setting up a clinical service is a whole thing. And sometimes organizations do not have someone who has that capability in-house. And I'm currently doing a piece of work supporting an organization explore activating a clinical component, which is going to have psychologists in it. So bringing psychologists on board is a whole, thing and a whole process, and also making sure that people are accredited, they are credentialed, and they've got the skills to deliver what you want them to deliver. So it's that whole sort of space. So it is different hats, but very, very enjoyable things. We are all skilled in different things, and also very complementary.
Oh, wow. It feels like a full circle moment from leaving home, back in 87, now in 2025, doing such transformational and needed work. As we wind up this conversation, Pearl, I would love to ask you a question that I ask all my guests. And this question is, if fear wasn't a factor,
Mm.
how do you think you would show up more in your work?
Wow, I love that. I actually, I'll reframe that a little bit. I don't know if people are usually naughty enough to do that for you. It's not so much fear for me. I've never been a fear-based person, but I'm a person who is cautious, as in I'm always mindful of making sure that if I'm going to go into a space, I've got skills to be in that space.
Right.
I have enough skill to be in that space. And maybe that's something that, mm, can hold someone back a little bit. I'm just very mindful about going into space. It's almost like, if you're going to say anything, you need to know what you're talking about. It's that if you're going to do something, you need to know that you've got the skills to do it. That's
Yeah.
that's my fear bit, but it's not a fear.
Mm.
If I did not have that level of caution, maybe a level of humility, maybe, because I'm not as brazen, maybe, as some people who just go do things. I'm much more, am I able to do this? Am I going to do it well? If that wasn't the case for me, I think I would be working more at this stage in a global in more global setting. I think I'm planning on doing that anyway, but I think I would be there by now if I had not had this sense of caution and maybe it's a level of humility. So if fear wasn't an issue and if self censoring wasn't an issue, I'll be working globally a lot more by now.
I love how you've reframed that. There's always such a positivity in how you speak and put things out there. And my hope and prayer is that you do get this work global. You do get on a global stage because you have so eloquently, um, generously shared your journey, and just you're a wealth of information. There are so many things we didn't get to talk about. There's the perimenopause project, there's the mother and son project, and many, many other things. You have to, Pearl. You have to come back for us to have another conversation.
All right, I'll be self-indulgent next time and talk about my projects because the consultancy group space is, what I see as workspace.
Yeah.
And then there are these projects that I do because they are important social impact things. But also I tend to reflect on what's needed in the world. I know it sounds very grand, but I've always done this since I was a kid to just, or a young person, I should say, about what's needed in the world and how I can be of service. So the perimenopause and menopause space is one of those for me because we have a lot of information, we have a lot of support to provide in that space, but also the Mother and Son project, which is something that I'm doing with my son to reach this um, space as a community
Mhm.
and as a country where we are honoring the connection and the relationship between mother and son and using it to protect and to nurture other relationships.
Mhm. So, Pearl, to anybody listening, how can they get in touch with you? Where is the best place that they can connect with you?
Uh-huh. Well, I really some of the things I do because I just find them really joyful. I used to facilitate a lot of retreats in some years ago. I don't have as much time now to convene retreats, but I do really enjoy facilitating things because conversations are always so life-changing. But I
Mhm.
also really enjoy emceeing. I've been doing a lot of emceeing work lately.
Yes.
And I would, if anyone would like to have me as an MC, I would be very, very pleased and thrilled to come and do MCing gigs, because you can learn so much when you're preparing for them. But also, it's a chance to be in a room with people that have been convened without me having to convene them, just
That's
having the
right.
chance to, yeah, because of people from all different spaces and different sectors, you get a chance to spend an evening or spend an afternoon with them. So that'll be really lovely. But people can reach me via LinkedIn. It's
Yeah.
always easy. Just bring up my LinkedIn profile. But also, they can obviously, Google me and find, where I am. My email
Mhm.
is proud@westnet.com.au if they
Beautiful.
wanted to just have a bit of a conversation before we get into, how we might be of service to them in the consultancy.
That is so generous, Pearl. Thank you so much. I will have those links in the show notes for anybody who is wanting to connect with you. Head over to the
Mhm.
show notes. That's where all those details will be. Pearl, my dear, thank you so much for your time and
Mhm.
And truly, we've only just scratched the surface. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. And let's go represent.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.